Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well this morning. We're just getting started here. I'll give folks a minute or so to join. I see people are rapidly joining, so we'll get started in just a minute. Thank you. All right, I think we can get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's public workshop on the low carbon fuel standard. My name is Cheryl Laskowski, and I am the chief of the Transportation Fuels branch, which oversees the Lcfs program. We have Matt Botel here today. He is the division chief over the Industrial Strategies Division, and I will hand it to him for some opening remarks. Matt?
Thanks, Cheryl, and thank you everybody for joining this morning. Really appreciate you taking the time to continue this conversation we're having on the low carbon fuel standard. I wanted to take just a moment to talk a little bit about the context in which we're having these workshops. And really for us, we've been moving forward on holding these workshops because of the importance of the low carbon fuel standard in helping California fight climate change. And because we've been seeing through the various analyses we've been doing on the scoping plan, feedback that we've been getting from the governor on the importance of really rapidly deploying the clean fuel infrastructure this decade that we need to both achieve the governor's zero emission vehicle order, the 2035, the 2040, the 2045 objectives, and that ZEVIO, as well as achieve carbon neutrality. The pathways that we've been identifying in our scoping plan all rely on a significant increase in the deployment of clean fuel infrastructure, whether it's electricity, hydrogen, liquid fuels, the mix of fuels that we know that we're going to need to achieve carbon neutrality. And so we know that if we're going to be successful towards getting towards those long-term targets, and the LCFS is going to be a critical tool in helping deploy that infrastructure and deploy the investment from the private sector towards that infrastructure, we need to do a number of things with the low carbon fuel standard. And first and foremost, and we talked about this at the last workshop that we held back in July, we know that we need to look at the stringency of the LCFS by 2030, and then also establish some post 2030 targets so that there's some certainty, some market certainty for investors and fuel suppliers, and they can take that certainty and make decisions on the investments that they're going to make into this clean fueling infrastructure. This was backstopped by some of the comments that Board Member Sperling made at the June scoping plan hearing, asking that we look at the stringency of the LCFS, as well as a recent letter that the governor sent our chair, Chair Randolph, on July 22nd, asking that we do the same within the low carbon fuel standard as well. So we also know that we need to make sure that the design of the program acknowledges the payback periods for these investments, these critical investments, both those that have been made in the past and those that are going to be coming forward. And so we look forward to working with you all on how the regulatory design changes that we're talking about as part of these concept workshops are done in a way that considers those timelines, those payback timelines. And then finally, we know that the administration of the program needs to be fair, consistent, and efficient, and that this will become even more important as the fuel pool grows, the number of fuel pathway applications that we process increases, the complexity and the unique situations come up as we administer the program. And so today's workshop is really focused on this latter point, but we're going to continue conversations on the others as well in future workshops. But I really want to make sure that everybody's grounded in the fact that this is the long-term plan for LCFS. How do we utilize this very valuable tool to address climate change, both this decade, encourage that investment to happen that needs to happen in the fuel infrastructure, as well as post 2030, and we're really talking about the long-term plan here for the utilization of the low carbon fuel standard to support those important objectives that California has, particularly carbon neutrality. So with that context, I'm going to give it back to Cheryl. She's going to, I think, have the staff start the presentation. So Cheryl.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, for that context. Really helpful as we continue our conversation here on potential changes to the Lcfs. So like Matt said, we've got a number of folks here today, and I would like them to introduce themselves as we get started. So I'm going to first ask Greg to start us off. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Greg Merman, the branch chief of the Program Planning and Management branch. We oversee the mandatory reporting program and the verification portion of the low carbon fuel standard. Thank you.
Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Anil Prabhu. I manage the lifecycle team for liquid biofuels, electricity, hydrogen, and emerging fuels. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Connors. I'm an implementation manager for a section that primarily handles reporting of fuel on a quarterly basis, as well as credit banking and transfer. From my section, you'll also hear from Jacob Englander, who will be presenting later. He is the lead staff for most of the electricity and hydrogen provisions. Later, you'll hear from Steven de Esterhouzy, a lead staff for liquid fuels reporting, and he'll be handling the Q&A. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ray Chen. I'm the manager for the fuel project evaluation section within the Lcfs program. Our section oversees the project-based accrediting provision and some of the fuel pathways under the program. Good to be here.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jordan Ramalingam. I'm manager of the team that is mostly tasked with long-term policy for the program, as well as our zero emission vehicle infrastructure provisions and our equity provisions. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. All right, so next slide, please. Today, we're here to continue our informal public discussion of potential changes to the Lcfs program on specific topics. Today, we want to talk about ways that the program can be streamlined and updates that need to happen or that staff think should happen. So as we talked about before, the program is really successful, it has a lot of interest from stakeholders and even other jurisdictions. Because of the interest for other jurisdictions to take up this program and the continued increase in our own program, we're seeing a lot of interest, and so we're really interested in identifying ways that we can streamline this program. So we're excited by the participation and looking for ways to create efficiencies in the program. So staff are going to talk about some potential streamlining changes. Additionally, with each regulatory update, we do program updates that reflect the science and integrity of the program. So staff will also be talking about some updates that they're thinking about. So today's topics, as we talked about last time, don't encompass everything that could be changes for the Lcfs in an upcoming rulemaking. We're having a series of workshops, and as Matt alluded to, we had a workshop in July. We're having one today, and we'll continue to have informal workshops as staff are thinking about future changes. So today's discussion is not fully encompassing of all the potential changes. So just keep that in mind. Before we get started, we have a really good turnout today. I see over 550 attendees so far, so that reflects the interest in the program. We have 3 hours for today's workshop, so I ask that stakeholders keep their feedback to the topics and brief, and longer responses can, or longer comments can be given through written feedback. With that, I'm going to hand it to Jeremy Loeb from the Fuels Evaluation Section team to continue the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. For today's workshop, my colleagues Jacob Englander, David Thompson, and myself will go through the full slide deck, and then we will open it up for feedback and questions at the end. To provide feedback, you should use the raise hand function in the GoToWebinar toolbar, which should be located to the right of your screen as shown. When staff calls your name and activates your audio controls, you can unmute yourself by clicking the red microphone button and proceed to introduce yourself. The orange arrow at the top of the toolbar will expand the control panel for additional options. Written feedback online will be available until September 19th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. You can find a link to submit feedback as well as all relevant documents on the Lcfs meetings and workshops page. Next slide, please. So in our July workshop, we presented this overview of how the Lcfs fits into broader state climate policy, where we are today, and what formal rulemaking looks like. In brief, the Lcfs is part of the state's set of policies to meet ambitious climate goals, which are described in the scoping plan. The draft 2022 scoping plan was released in May of this year. The draft scoping plan was presented to the board for its first hearing on June 23rd, and staff are now revising the document based on board direction. In July, the governor directed CARB to consider even stronger actions. The scoping plan will return to the board for its second hearing later this year, where the board will consider adoption of the final scoping plan. Staff will develop changes to the Lcfs based on the final version of the scoping plan. The previous Lcfs workshop was held on July 7th, 2022, in which staff solicited feedback from the stakeholder community on potential changes, such as adjustments to the compliance targets, infrastructure crediting, and opportunities to include new fuels in the regulation and graduate some credit generators from the Lcfs. Stakeholders have submitted over 130 comment letters, which Lcfs staff are currently reviewing. Staff will be incorporating feedback as appropriate into future workshops and rulemaking steps. We appreciate these valuable insights that can help strengthen the Lcfs program. After the informal workshops, we plan to begin a more formal rulemaking process, as outlined here. Next slide, please. The next two slides provide an overview of status and trends in the Lcfs. Next slide. So as we discussed in the July workshop, the Lcfs has been meeting annual compliance goals, and we are seeing overperformance that we expect to continue with the current compliance trajectory. The current trajectory includes a 20% carbon intensity reduction from 2010 levels by 2030. Next slide. We are also seeing increased diversification of transportation fuel options, particularly with increased renewable diesel, electricity, and biomethane. California's mix of climate, energy, and air quality statutes, regulations, and programs, including the low carbon fuel standard, have created an environment to attract this investment to low carbon fuels and are driving this growth in low carbon fuels. With Lcfs playing an important role in expanding the market for low carbon fuels, it is important to keep the program efficient, flexible, and relevant as technology and fuel choices evolve. In this context, we are considering proposing potential amendments to streamline the implementation of the Lcfs. Next slide, please. In the next slides, we will discuss potential updates to streamline implementation of pathway certification, verification, and base credits for electric vehicles. We are seeking feedback from stakeholders on these potential updates that may become amendments to the low carbon fuel standard regulation. Next slide. First, we will be covering a potential modification to the Deem complete date for Tier 2 pathways. Next slide. Both Tier 1 and Tier 2 applications include a Deem complete date that serves as a basis for potentially determining the first eligible fuel reporting quarter. Both types of applications include preliminary staff review, third-party validation, post-validation review, and, if deemed eligible, certification. Tier 2 applications generally expend more staff resources due to complexities with lifecycle methodologies and inclusion of non-standard inputs. Also, Tier 2 applications require additional time for public posting and reviewing applicant responses to public comments, if any are received. Currently, the Deem complete point in the application review process is different for Tier 1 and Tier 2 applications. Tier 1 applications are deemed complete when the verification body, or VB, issues a positive or qualified positive validation statement. Tier 2 applications are deemed complete upon routing to a VB. Next slide, please. Staff is considering potentially aligning the deemed complete designation for both Tier 1 and Tier 2 applications as the quarter in which a positive or qualified positive statement is provided to CARB. Next slide, please. Staff have identified potential benefits to aligning the deemed complete date for Tier 1 and Tier 2 applications. First, it ensures consistency across applications without preferentially benefiting Tier 2 applications. Second, it allows LCFS staff to conduct a thorough preliminary review of the application without the pressure of routing the application to validation close to the end of a given quarter. A thorough preliminary review of Tier 2 applications facilitates the development of clear operating conditions and site-specific inputs, which in turn expedite the validation and post-validation engineering review phases. Next slide, please. Aligning the deemed complete designation for both Tier 1 and Tier 2 pathways potentially minimizes confusion of the current different approaches to the two types of applications. Staff considered removing the deemed complete date entirely in our December 2021 workshop, but understand its value as a market signal, which stakeholder comment letters indicated was desirable. Based on current processing times for Tier 2 pathways, the impacts of the potential change on reporting are expected to be minimal. If the deemed complete designation is revised for Tier 2 applications, any delays in certification of applications that might impact fuels reporting could be remediated by a potential credit true-up for temporary fuel pathways used for reporting during the application process. Next slide, please. So next, I will be discussing details of a potential update to consider credit true-up for temporary fuel pathways. Next slide. A LCFS pathway application requires new fuel production facilities to provide 90 days of steady state operational data. After an application is submitted, it takes more than 90 days on average to certify new fuel pathways. Temporary pathways provide an opportunity for fuel producers to report fuel sales and generate credits during startup until their Tier 1 or Tier 2 application is certified. Also, if new feedstocks are added to an existing production process, fuel producers can utilize temporary fuel pathways to report fuel sales before the new fuel feedstock combinations can be certified. The carbon intensities for temporary fuel pathways are designed to be conservative, but still provide valuable credit generating opportunities to fuel producers. Temporary pathway CIs are initially approved for up to 2 quarters with the possibility of extension. Next slide. Stakeholders have requested the consideration of a true-up of crediting once a Tier 1 or Tier 2 pathway has been certified. Staff are exploring the potential to permit fuel pathway holders to realize credits attributable to the difference in carbon intensities between temporary and facility-specific certified fuel pathways. Currently, staff is contemplating that credit true-up eligibility will be effective the first full quarter of operational data that is coincident with the relevant temporary fuel pathway. Next slide. A credit true-up could potentially facilitate recovery of unrealized credits from reporting using temporary fuel pathways. It could also potentially alleviate concerns related to delays in pathway certification and the proposed change to deemed complete date for Tier 2 applications. Moreover, a true-up could better reflect the emissions that actually occurred at a facility. If implemented, this could ease pressure to expedite pathway certification. Next slide. So staff invites stakeholders to provide feedback on the implications of overlap of the credit true-up period with the requirements for submitting annual fuel pathway reports and other issues related to its potential implementation. Next slide. Staff are also looking at our pathway calculators to identify streamlining opportunities. In the next few slides, I am going to discuss the status of Tier 1 hydrogen calculator development and potential updates to emission factors. Next slide. Currently, hydrogen pathway applications must either use lookup table or Tier 2 pathways. Even minor changes to lookup table pathway inputs require elevating the pathway application to a Tier 2 approach. Since 2020, 60% of the hydrogen pathways certified by the Lcfs have been Tier 2 pathways. Tier 2 applications require significant time for review and processing by staff, and place a significant burden on applicants to meet all the requirements for Tier 2 applications. Modeling of hydrogen pathway CIs using booking claim of renewable natural gas, mostly biomethane produced from dairy or swine manure, requires significant time commitment by staff. The same applies to pathways which include low CI sources of hydrogen. The draft scoping plan projects large quantities of hydrogen needed in the transportation sector by 2045, and staff have observed an uptick in hydrogen reported in the program over the last couple of years. With the anticipated growth in hydrogen in the program, staff expect a large number of hydrogen pathway applications to be submitted for consideration in the coming years. Next slide, please. So a simplified Tier 1 hydrogen calculator would offer many benefits. First, it would expedite review and validation by facilitating both standard and site-specific operational data inputs. Second, it would include options for reporting low CI sources of hydrogen. And third, book and claim data for hydrogen could be integrated into the calculator to expedite validation and annual verification. Overall, the development of a Tier 1 simplified CI calculator for hydrogen can contribute to expansion of hydrogen, including low CI hydrogen, under the Lcfs. Next slide, please. Staff is considering the inclusion of 2 hydrogen production methods as part of the Tier 1 calculator. They are 1, steam methane reforming, and 2, electrolysis. Steam methane reforming would cover 2 types of feedstock: North American natural gas and biomethane, also known as renewable natural gas or RNG. For biomethane, the calculator would potentially model both direct supply and book and claim accounting. In the case of electrolysis, the proposed Tier 1 calculator would permit the modeling of grid electricity, behind the meter electricity, and book and claim low CI electricity. Next slide, please. So like other simplified Tier 1 calculators, staff are considering offering both standard and site-specific inputs for certain input parameters, such as SMR efficiency, electrolysis efficiency, energy usage in production, boil-off loss, and electricity use used at dispensing stations. The Tier 1 calculator is expected to model common inputs and processes used in feedstock production, hydrogen transport, and dispensing. Staff request stakeholder feedback relevant to the following input parameters and any additional parameters for consideration. For hydrogen production, staff is soliciting feedback on the hydrogen technologies to be included, standard values for input, co-products, allocation method, conversion efficiency, etc. For liquefaction and regasification, staff seek feedback on liquefaction inputs, process energy use, electricity, and other process energy used. For hydrogen transport to transfill stations and/or fueling stations, staff seek feedback on transport mode and boil-off loss. For book and claim of electricity and biomethane, staff seek feedback on whether these features should be integrated into the calculator. Staff may consider other calculator inputs based on stakeholder feedback. Staff requests stakeholders to provide relevant data, documents, and other information related to design considerations summarized in the table. Next slide, please. In addition to potential implementation streamlining ideas presented here, staff request suggestions and feedback on any additional ideas that may help the streamlining of pathway applications, review, and verification processes. Next slide, please. In this next section, we will cover potential updates to life cycle emission factors, electricity and hydrogen verification, and electric vehicle-based crediting methodology. Next slide. Our first topic in this section is potential updates to life cycle emission factors. Next slide. Emission factors are an integral part of the CA GREET 3.0 model and simplified Tier 1 calculators to quantify life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. Emission factors embedded in the simplified Tier 1 calculators are developed predominantly from the Argonne National Labs GREET model, internal CARB models, and the California Energy Commission. Updating emission factors has been part of previous rulemaking updates to the Lcfs regulation, which allows the Lcfs model fuel life cycle emissions using the most accurate, robust, and up-to-date data sources. The updates may potentially be considered to account for changes in electricity mix, deployment of new fuel production technologies, new science and data, and updates to model sources. Next slide, please. Historically, Lcfs amendments have included updating of embedded life cycle inventory to consider modeling fuel life cycle emissions using the most accurate, robust, and up-to-date data sources. For this round of amendments, staff is potentially considering updating emission factors included in all Tier 1 simplified CI calculators. Data sources are likely to include Argonne's latest version of GREET, the IEA, EIA, FAO, USDA, EPA, and CARB and peer-reviewed literature. Next slide. Staff is considering updating several emission factors to include the newest eGrid data for electricity mixes, fugitive emissions from natural gas production and pipeline, updates to the CARBOB and ULSD carbon intensities using updated refinery data from an updated version of OPG, crop production data, transport emissions by mode, tailpipe emissions of California fleets from MFAC, and others as required for the Tier 1 calculators. If emission factors are expected to be updated, staff will release updated emission factors for stakeholder feedback as part of a future workshop related to the current round of Lcfs amendments. Next slide. Staff requests stakeholders to provide relevant data, peer-reviewed literature, and other information to support consideration of updating emission factors outlined earlier. In deciding which emission factors to update, staff are considering using the criteria such as whether emission factors are outdated, for example, the evolving grid electricity mix, the availability of new data, or updates to the source model such as OPG, whether there are strong and defensible science and supporting data, and new fuel and process technologies. Next slide. Staff are seeking input on the emission factors potentially being subject to updates and welcome additional peer-reviewed literature and data sources that support these updates. Next slide. So next, I will pass the mic to my colleague, David Thompson, to present the verification-related considerations.
Thank you, Jeremy. My name is David Thompson, and I am an Air Resources Engineer on the verification team, and I will be discussing verification-related proposals. Successful greenhouse gas reduction programs require a system to monitor, report, and verify data in order to maintain the integrity of the reduction program. Currently, the Lcfs supplements the existing work of CARB staff with a verification system that requires regulated entities to retain the services of independent third-party verifiers. The transition of zero-emission vehicles using zero-carbon electricity is critical for achieving California's climate and air quality targets. And as zero-emission vehicle-centric transaction types continue to generate more and more credits, it is vital to ensure all data and information provided to CARB accurately represents the operation of the regulated entity in order to maintain the integrity of the Lcfs program. Next slide. Therefore, CARB staff is proposing the addition of zero-emission vehicle-centric credit-generating transaction types to third-party verification requirements for quarterly fuel transaction reports. CARB staff is proposing to add verification requirements to EV charging transaction types, electric transportation refrigeration units, electric cargo handling equipment, and electric power for ocean-going vessels plugged in at berth, fixed guideway electricity fueling, and fuel cell vehicle fueling transaction types, not limited to hydrogen from book and claim biomethane. Next slide. While verification of data is important to maintaining the integrity of LCFS program, CARB staff recognizes that there are costs associated with third-party verification. In order to ensure that the program is not cost prohibitive for small producers while also ensuring the integrity of the program, the LCFS regulation includes language that allows for small credit generators to either defer annual verification or be exempt altogether. Those only apply to liquid fuels in the current regulation. To ensure that small credit generators of the proposed fuel types do not cost out of the program, CARB staff is proposing to create an exemption to the third-party verification requirements for credit producers of the proposed transaction types who produce less than 6,000 credits. CARB staff's analysis, next slide, thanks. CARB staff's analysis showed that if the proposed transaction types had been subject to 2019, 2020, and 2021 verification requirements, with an exemption for entities reporting less than 6,000 credits, roughly 99% of all generated credits would have been verified across all applicable fuels. This shows that the exemption for the proposed transaction types would maintain the integrity of the LCFS program as a whole. CARB staff are continuing analysis of cost impacts and request stakeholder feedback on the staff consideration to expand the transaction types for verification and associated implications. Next, I will pass the mic to my colleague Jacob Englander to present residential charging related considerations.
Thank you, David. I will discuss base credits and underlying data used to calculate them. Staff is looking to evaluate potential changes to the sources of data used to calculate the plug-in electric vehicle or PEV charging rate for base credits. Next slide, please. Base credits are credits which represent residential PEV charging at the California grid average carbon intensity. Electrical distribution utilities, or EDUs, provide data from residents with dedicated EV charging rates for base credit calculations conducted by CARB staff. Base credits are distributed back to the EDUs. Base credits were introduced to the LCFS in 2015, and at that time, staff determined that dedicated PEV charging rate data was the best available. Staff also assumed that the use of these rates would grow and would be a sustainable source of PEV charging data. Next slide, please. Charging data from dedicated EV rates are reported by the large EDUs on a quarterly basis. This method has functioned well. However, we have found that the use of dedicated PEV rates have started to decline as utilities have moved more towards full household time of use rate structures. In parallel, in the 2018 amendments, the LCFS added residential incremental crediting. Incremental crediting has allowed entities to generate LCFS credits from entities who can report residential PEV charging using a lower than grid average carbon intensity value. Entities register individual vehicle identification numbers, or VINs, and report total dispensed electricity for the reporting period for each vehicle. Currently, 11 reporting entities representing community choice aggregators, original equipment manufacturers, electric vehicle supply equipment networks, and software providers are regularly reporting data from individual vehicles. Next slide, please. To understand why obtaining charging data from residential PEV charging is important, I will briefly summarize how residential base credits are calculated. There are three components for the base credit calculation. the number of PEVs on the road, the apportioning of the PEVs to utilities, and the estimation of the residential EV charging per PEV. The first component is to estimate the number of PEVs on the road. CARB utilizes Department of Motor Vehicle data to determine the number of registered PEVs and supplements that number of PEVs with vehicles that are registered in the Lcfs for incremental crediting, but are not registered in the DMV. The second step is apportioning the EVs to the utilities. And finally, there is the EV charging rate. As mentioned previously, the large utilities provide dedicated EV rate meter data, and the average charging rate for each utility is utilized for the vehicles in their territory. LCFS staff then calculates a statewide weighted average charging rate for the remaining utilities. There is a link in this slide to the CARB published base crediting methodology with more detail. Next slide, please. There are many factors which could define what is meant by best available data, which is motivating this discussion today. I will discuss a few potential sources for estimating residential EV charging activity. These sources include the continued use of utility-provided PEV dedicated charging rate data, estimation of EV charging from whole house time of use rate data, the use of on-vehicle telematics or metered residential charging data, as well as the CARB-developed emissions factor or MFAC model. When evaluating potential data sources, the key criteria we are considering are the sample size, along with how representative of EV charging the source will be, availability, transparency, as in the ease of documenting or describing, and implementation. Next slide, please. The first source of residential EV charging data I will discuss is to maintain the status quo. The current estimation method from dedicated EV rates report data from 3,000 to 5,000 households, which account for less than 1% of PEVs in California. As discussed previously, there is also concern about the future of the use of dedicated EV rates by the utilities. However, the use of this data is easy to characterize, and utilities and CARB staff have developed streamlined methods to ensure accurate reporting and auditing. Next slide, please. The second option would be to leverage whole household time of use electricity rates to estimate charging. Time of use rates have been widely adopted by utilities, providing cost following price signals to consumers. There is the potential for many utilities to participate, provided that they can isolate households with known PEVs. The use of full household time of use rates have been described in the scientific literature, and using a method of taking the difference between before and after a household has an EV. However, the implementation of utilizing this data would pose reporting challenges for the utilities. They would need to be able to regularly canvass households to determine the presence of EVs, whether the reported time of use data could be affected by on-home solar or batteries, etc., as well as coordinating closely with CARB staff to establish methodologies for identifying households and reporting charging data. Next slide, please. Another potential source of residential charging data could be the residential incremental reported data. Entities report data for quarterly fuels transactions reports, and entities can report utilizing on-vehicle telematics or off-board chargers. Since the addition of incremental crediting with the 2018 amendments, over 600,000 vehicles, or roughly 60% of all PEVs in California, have been registered for crediting, and over 400,000 vehicles, close to 40% of all PEVs, consistently report. The credit calculation for incremental crediting is based upon the difference between the reported CI of the reporting entity and the California grid average. As the California grid average declines due to the increase of renewables on the grid, the credit generation per vehicle may decline, and therefore there may be less motivation for reporting entities to participate. However, there are third-party data sources that staff consider if incremental crediting reporting declines substantially. Next slide, please. The last source that I will discuss today for estimating residential PEV charging would be leveraging the MFAC model. MFAC is a model developed by CARB to assist the implementation of the state implementation plan, as well As with it, all of the mobile source regulations, such as the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulation, Advanced Clean Fleets, Heavy Duty Omnibus Rule, etc. A component of MFAC is an estimated projection of EV driving and charging behavior, represented by the total electricity usage and number of vehicles, which could be manipulated into an estimate of residential EV charging. However, utilizing MFAC in this fashion is not how it was designed, and model estimates are not intended to represent charging behavior. MFAC is, however, a publicly available and well-documented model, and would eliminate the need for reporting by utilities and would also not be affected by the relative incentive of incremental credits. Next slide, please. LCFS staff is seeking input as to how to best address the observed changes in residential EV charging availability, as well as feedback on the best available data to residential charging in the long term. This concludes the staff presentation. Next slide, please. We'll now move on to the feedback portion of this workshop. As a reminder, if you'd like to share feedback or ask questions, please click the raised hand button on the GoToWebinar toolbar. When staff call your name and activate your microphone, please unmute yourself and proceed to introduce yourself and provide your feedback. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Stephen D'Estrasi, to facilitate the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. We currently have 8 hands raised. When I call your name, please unmute yourself, and here we go. Patrick Couch, your microphone has been unmuted, and you may ask your question. Patrick, please unmute yourself. Okay, we'll get back to him. Dean Taylor, your microphone has been unmuted, and you may ask your question.
Hi, sorry about that. I don't know why it was hard to unmute. I'm Dean Taylor, representing the California Electric Transportation Coalition, and this is more of a comment than a question. We note that every single scenario in the CARB's recent scoping plan talks about fast and wide deployment of transportation electrification. Cal ETC shares this goal in the funding of the scoping plan and considers LCFS an important tool for diversifying transportation fuel sector and supporting the shift from oil to electricity fuel. The reason we recommend the estimation methodology be expedited is that CARB has multiple sources of data that could improve the methodology. CARB is one of the best data sources in its MFAC emissions inventory and other manufacturer data also only accessible to CARB that can easily be used to improve the estimation methodology. We've provided more detailed comments to CARB regarding our thinking. At a high level, we think it is important to keep the new estimation methodology simple and use data for the whole fleet or large classes of passenger cars and trucks. We do not support different credit calculations for individual manufacturers or individual owners of EVs, but would support differentiating between cars and trucks, plug-in hybrids and BEVs, and by the year, as cars drive more when they are new than they do as they age. In general, we would suggest keeping the methodology as inclusive as possible, simple and accurate as possible. CARB has a few data sources that can accomplish all three. In addition, the data does not need to be perfect. Many different factors in other parts of the LCFS regulation are good rather than perfect. Here's a high-level description of a more accurate metric for electricity fueling from home that would substantially improve the current estimation methodology and requires no regulatory modification. In other words, this could be done immediately in order to improve the accuracy of the estimation calculation. We recommend using the MFAC database for gasoline consumption for light duty classes 1, class 2A, class 2B vehicles separately and convert this into average kilowatt hours per year for BEVs and plug-in hybrids. Then for plug-in hybrids only, reduce this by approximately 56%, and finally reduce the kilowatt hours per year for both plug-in hybrids and BEV by 10% to account for away from home charging. This reflects, we believe, a very accurate method for fuel usage. MFACT is the most accurate reflection of on-road fuel use and miles driven that we are aware of. It is based on decades of confidential car and driver information and vehicle testing data. No other metrics in the existing methodology require improvement, as we think they are fine. It's really going after the kilowatt hours per year number. EVs are already capable of meeting the vast majority of driver needs, and the population will continue to grow, so it makes sense that the driving behavior of Californians will stay consistent with MFAC data, and EVs will meet the vast majority of driving needs. There's no longer a reason to assume a fleet of EVs will be driven differently than their conventional counterparts, and it's counterintuitive to market realities and CARB goals to assume that they will be driven differently. Our proposal uses CARB data and improves on the current estimation methodology by accounting for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles' electric miles and away from home charging more accurately than the current method. We also support the current flexibility for the executive officer in the regulation, which allows updates to the estimation methodology off regulation, as is done for all other fuel pathways. Finally, we should not lose sight of the big picture. How credits are calculated is just one part of a 4-step process. From an online document we found, the other steps are who generates the credits, how credit revenue is used, and who oversees credit revenue spending. All 4 steps are separate and important, and we are supportive of CARB's current approach on generating credits, spending the credits, and oversight. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you so much for your comments. Stephen?
Sam Wade, your mic has been activated. Please unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Thanks very much, Stephen. This is Sam Wade with the Coalition for Renewable Natural Gas. We're the National Trade Association for the RNG industry in the US and Canada. First and foremost, thanks to the staff for the opportunity to comment today and for holding additional workshops at this level of detail. It's very helpful. We are in support of the general idea of truing up the temporary pathway scores to the certified pathway scores, but we think you could go even further and do a full true up to all verified CI scores on an annual basis. This would allow you to basically reduce concerns about pathway processing time and rely in a more sort of robust way on the validator and verifiers. If you're a pathway applicant and you currently exceed your CI score, you need to give credits back. But if your CI score is better than your certified score, you don't receive more. And we view that as fundamentally sort of underestimating the true benefits of the program. So we could correct that with a full ex-post true-up. We think that would be advisable and would be in the interest of accuracy, as well as obviously providing more value to all low carbon fuels. So we would support a full true-up, but we also support the partial true-up proposal on the table today. We'd also like to comment on the idea of improving the tier 1 calculators. We support adding new one for hydrogen and improving the ones that exist for biomethane. And we think this is related to the concept of a true up. When you have RNG as an input into making hydrogen and you have multiple sources of RNG going into your SMR plant, for example, it's much easier to do the accounting looking backward on what you actually purchased and utilized and turned into hydrogen than it is on a going forward basis where you're trying to estimate the volumes you'll receive from each RNG facility. So all of the accounting will be easier if we're looking backward when we're converting RNG into other fuels, including hydrogen. So we would certainly support the improvements to the tier 1 process generally to make it easier for pathways to be processed in a timely way. And I think that includes both a new tier 1 calculator for hydrogen and improvements to the biomethane calculators as well, so that more of the volume can fall under those tier 1 applications. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I appreciate the comments, and I would look for how you see implementation happening for both a temporary and the broader concept that you're proposing. So thank you.
Sounds good. Yeah, we'll provide that in written form. Thanks.
Miles Heller, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Great, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. Miles Heller with Air Products. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today. And thank you for including the Tier 1 Simplified calculator for hydrogen. We strongly support that inclusion. And we look forward to working with you to help develop that tool. Certainly including SMR and electrolysis is important. We'd ask that you don't foreclose on the idea of including autothermal reforming or ammonia as a transport mechanism for low carbon hydrogen. And we look forward to working with you on that. Ask that you consider that as well. And lastly, while I understand the calculator to be focused on book and claim for RNG and RECs, and we certainly support, I did want to raise a question about the broader issue of hydrogen book and claim or environmental attribute tracking for hydrogen. I know that's something that you'd indicated you were going to work on at a past workshop. I'm just wondering if you can give me any insight as to when we'll hear something more on that.
Thank you. Yes, glad that you're in support of the calculator, and we are still looking at other concepts. So like we said up front, where this isn't comprehensive. So definitely looking into other things that we need to do to streamline the program and also reflect what we're seeing in the scoping plan, which calls for a lot of additional electricity and hydrogen coming online. And so, any comments that you have about how we can facilitate that would be helpful. And we'll address it in a future workshop. Thank you.
Stefan Unash, your microphone has been activated. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. I have several questions. One regarding the development of Tier 1 calculators for hydrogen. That's a good idea, so that you have some consistency. I would recommend that you follow the format of your other calculators like the BDRD or the Tier 1 landfill gas calculator, so that verifiers have a consistent data structure. One thing I heard in the underlying discussion was that the calculator might assess the carbon intensity of renewable hydrogen from RNG. And CARB could provide a inventory calculator that shows the inventory of RNG and its use. Now, that same burden should also be placed on the CNG and LNG community. It's basically symmetrical. So whatever you do to hydrogen, you should also do to CNG and LNG. Just for clarification purposes, when you talk about doing a Tier 2 calculator, does that mean that there will no longer be lookup table values and there will no longer be standard values for natural gas steam reforming or liquefaction or even hydrogen compression at the fueling station? Because some of that compression burden is really due to the underutilization of the stations. And if you look at just the energy used to compress the hydrogen rather than to cool the hydrogen and wait around for customers to show up, those are different values. And finally, I would strongly support that you look at the donations to the credit bank. This results in what we call the yo-yo hysteresis of carbon intensity, where your carbon intensity drops, you give it to the credit bank, and then if you accept the new carbon intensity, you may incur newer deficits. So that's not the fairest approach to fuel producers, and a form of true-up from the verification/credit bank would be appreciated. Thank you.
Hey, Stefan, this is Anil. Thanks for that feedback. Of course, the expectation as part of this workshop is for you to provide us with detailed feedback about what you would like incorporated in the calculator. Specifically, you asked about lookup table pathways. The expectation, if everything works well, is to sort of have that embedded as standard inputs in the calculator, right? And again, one of the reasons we're putting this out is you have your standard inputs, but your transportation is a little different from the lookup table, which sort of triggers a tier 2 approach, right? So embedded in there will be standard, maybe conservative inputs that folks who don't want to go through the whole process of, facility specific may be available to. So we may in fact do away with the lookup table, but it depends upon how this whole modeling effort evolves. But thank you so much for putting that out there.
Don Gilstrap, your mic has been activated. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good morning. Thank you. Don Gilstrap from Chevron. A couple of quick comments and a clarifying question on the credit true-up topic. First, thank you for considering this. We're very much in favor of it. And I want to echo Sam Wade's comments on the value of a full true-up. I think that should definitely be considered. One comment, I'm a bit concerned by the words could be considered on slide 16 around credit true-ups. I hope that doesn't mean that this is something that would be decided on a case-by-case basis. I think that just throws all the uncertainty right back into the pathway certification process. If there's a true-up added to the regulation, it should be automatic for every pathway. And then a clarifying question, you say upon certification of a fuel pathway, is that final certification or certification of the provisional pathway? Thanks.
Go ahead, Anil.
Hey, Don, thanks for that comment. It's just very preliminary at this point in terms of what we're sort of potentially offering as an update. We've heard feedback from the December workshop, and the expectation is to sort of roll this out that is fair. We don't necessarily want to, eliminate somebody for not meeting certain requirements, but we'll be very prescriptive about what or which pathway holder would essentially be, qualified for this true-up. But at the same time, we clearly want to understand the implementation issues and challenges, if any. So once we get the feedback from stakeholders, we really want feedback and not just a standard support saying we like this approach. We want to implement this if it streamlines the regulatory effort and minimizes effort for everybody, staff as well as the reporting entities and everybody. So that's sort of the expectation, but we're open to getting ideas and thoughts from the stakeholder community.
Yeah, and I'll just add into that. Thanks, Anil. The idea here is this is just a staff concept at this point, and so what we're looking for is feedback, specific feedback, and how this could actually work in a streamlined and efficient way. So it wouldn't be on a case-by-case basis, and we're really curious about how this would work with an implementation. And so if it's something that we move forward with, we really need the community, the stakeholders to provide us how this could be streamlined, how this could actually make for efficiencies. We're not looking to add conflict or case-by-case issues for this process. So would really be looking to you all for how we could have a consistent and streamlined approach. Thank you.
Patrick Couch, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you, Patrick Couch from Gladstein Anderson Associates. A couple of questions on the potential to add verification requirements to certain transaction types. We have TRU, CHE, shore power, fixed guideway, fuel cells. Does that proposal extend to transactions that are reported under the lookup table pathways, or is the intent there to verify the actual transactions or to verify the fuel pathway reporting? That's question one. I can pause and wait, or I can throw out my other two questions for you.
You can go ahead with all of your questions
Okay.
and then we can respond. Thank you.
Sure. So the other, I guess, comment / question on the residential base crediting, it would seem to me that the primary data that we're receiving from the OEMs is probably the most accurate real-time information available. But whether it's worth CARB's effort to move to a different estimation approach, I think depends a lot on whether these four proposed methods produce substantially different results. And I was wondering if CARB is going to be able to present any sort of background documentation or analysis that shows, based on the data that you have today, what the resulting estimations would be from the different methodologies. And then the last question is, the electric forklift market credit assignments to the EDUs is essentially based on a very similar estimation methodology that the residential EV is using. And I was wondering, are you considering similar types of changes to the estimation methodology for electric forklifts?
All right, I can take the base credit question. So really what we're looking for here is in our regulation, what it says is to use the best approach available to us. And so that's what we're looking at. When we first developed this base crediting in 2015, we used the best data that was available at the time, and that was the dedicated PEV charge rates, as Jacob described. And what we've noticed over time is that those accounts are less representative. We might have other representative data. So what we're looking for is the best data, that's the best method available right now. So I think it's less about what the actual credit generation is going to be. We're really looking for feedback at this time on the most appropriate data source. And so that's what we're presenting here today and looking for feedback on. So thank you. I can also talk on the forklifts. We proposed in July to remove, potentially remove forklifts from the credit generation. And so, we asked for feedback on that, and so we're still looking at the comments. Prior to that, we had discussed metering forklifts. So I think your feedback on that would be helpful, but we did discuss a different path for forklifts moving forward. But happy to hear your comments.
For the verification transactions, what I believe was being proposed is verifying the quantities of fuel for all electricity vehicle application types as well as hydrogen. So that is specifically reflecting inclusion of more or all transaction types reported, and that's why the vehicle application types were listed in that slide. Thank you. Next question, Stephen. Thank you.
Scott Hederich, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Hey, it's Scott Hederich with Chevron RAG. Just want to echo some of the comments that was made. Appreciate the workshop. I'll hit the point I've hit before. These online workshops are fantastic, but I think to move back to an in-person opportunity as well, in order to see the dialogue back and forth between the different folks is very helpful. It generates additional follow-up questions. So I hope we are looking at more than just online opportunities in workshops going forward. But I had a specific question around MFAC. It's an interesting tool, and I know it's a proposal, and I know that we're several months out from having a final said, but would the design plan to be used to, or would the design plan be to use the EPA approved version of MFAC or a different version? If there's some feedback on that, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thanks. Yes, we've heard from folks on both sides of the in-person versus the remote. So we're certainly open to in-person workshops in the future, and hope to do one in person soon. So thank you for that. Anyone else want to respond on anything here? Yeah, so I'll just say on the MFAC, we just put out different approaches that we knew that people were providing to us, different data sets that are available out there. Wanted to provide kind of the context for what those data sources are and how accessible they are. The specifics, again, on exactly how we would, what versions we would use, that is a consideration. So as MFAC gets updated, how would we do that? I think those are relevant questions. So thank you for that as well.
Robert Parkhurst, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'd like to thank staff for another great workshop. Really appreciate it. I have two questions. The first is a very high-level one. You've got a pretty surgical and specific schedule today. Do you plan to provide some indication of what scope and timing you have on future workshops and what you would include in them? So that's question number one. And then a more specific question is I'd be interested in to hear you elaborate a little bit more about the updates to life cycle inventories and how those impact emission factors. Are they based on geography, historic land use, crop rotation? I'd be interested in hearing a little bit more kind of what you're thinking about that, and that'll help us provide comments on that. And then I should say, I apologize, I didn't say at the beginning, it's Robert Parkhurst. I'm with CRView Solutions, and I represent a number of companies looking at fuels going into the Lcfs program. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Robert. Yeah, so on the scope and timing of future workshops, so the slide that we put up earlier that showed kind of the scoping plan and the informal workshops, and then getting into a formal rulemaking. That's just to show where we are in the broader scope of the climate policy landscape in California. So really, we're looking at the scoping plan and following their schedule. They're updating the draft scoping plan now. They've got some work to do from board direction and from the governor's letter, as Matt talked about up front. And so they're expecting to go to the board later this year for adoption. And that really will help us to solidify our formal rulemaking schedule. That being said, these informal workshops to start to have the dialogue between staff and stakeholders on potential updates is really important. And so that's why we're doing a few here where we can, that doesn't kind of undermine anything that's going on in the scoping plan. So hoping to continue these through, at least have one more workshop this year, potentially. And then as the scoping plan gets finalized, then we can look at clearer timing for a rulemaking for the Lcfs. But that slide kind of gives you the general idea of how long it takes and the process that we go through for the informal to the formal part. And with that, I'm going to hand it to Anil if you want to say anything on the emission factors.
Hey, Robert, thanks for that comment. We've had several discussions in person with you, as well as many stakeholders who have asked these specific questions, but the program currently uses country-specific averages for agriculture inputs by crop type. And when you start looking at benefits to certain growers, it could create imbalances to the average inputs due to, most of the others would be non-adopters, which would skew the average higher. So that's why we're trying to stay away from small regional, inputs, or even for that matter, farm level specifics at this point. But we're always willing to work with you. We recognize that there are benefits of both GHG and ecosystems on sustainable farming practices. So we're always willing to listen, but that's where we are at this point today. But you're always welcome to provide comments. And if some of these practices that you have and the others have described become sort of the nationalized averages, it becomes an easier option for us to consider that more seriously.
Max Doherty, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thanks so much for having me on. My name is Max Doherty, and I'm representing Bayer Crop Science, the global leader in agriculture. Just going to Neil's comments there, while we recognize it wasn't a primary topic on today's agenda, we did want to join the workshop to at least invite further discussion regarding the opportunity to further drive the decarbonization of crop-based biofuel feedstocks in support of CARB's emission reduction targets. But before getting into a couple of comments, however, we just want to say that we really appreciate the opportunity to provide input into CARB's LCFS rulemaking, and further recognize and commend the agency's continued commitment and willingness to engage on the improvement of the program periodically. So today, we really wanted to attend to advocate on the behalf of the potential of climate smart agriculture and the tremendous opportunity it provides to reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, supporting the decarbonization of agricultural systems and the products it produces, including crop-based biofuels. At Bayer today, we're currently facilitating our Bayer Carbon program and working with farmers to support the adoption of climate smart farming techniques, providing them financial incentives for the adoption of practices like cover cropping and no-till. We've also developed and implemented Climate Field View, a digital farming platform on over 180 million acres for precise measurement, reporting, and verification of growers adopting climate smart practices and the GHG reductions they produce. And recently, based on data we're collecting via Climate Field View and for our Bayer Carbon program, we measured over a 30% carbon intensity reduction in crop feedstocks through the implementation of climate smart farming practices. So to this end, by recognizing climate smart ag and in the LCFS program, CARB could stand to further and more widely drive the adoption of climate smart agriculture practices that can drive significant GHG reduction in the life cycle of biofuels. So to that end, we would really welcome the opportunity to engage and work with CARB to inform the development of a climate smart ag program component that draws on our learnings and that can be effectively implemented within the necessary verification systems. Thank you very much for the great workshop today and for allowing us on to make these comments.
Hey, apologize for, this is Anil, apologize I didn't get your name, but we would sort of appreciate if you could provide feedback in your comment letter about how these practices are being adopted, and also particularly given funding from the IRA that was recently signed by the president. We want to understand if they are being adopted at a pace that allows for us to consider them sort of like the average practices across the, most of the part of the country, and that would definitely be very helpful. Thank you, Max. I got your name from Stephen, who is monitoring the chat. So thanks, Max.
David Goerty, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This is Dave Gogerty with Novozymes. We work closely with liquid biofuel producers, and I just wanted to provide two brief points, especially on streamlining implementation, particularly for biofuel pathways. I appreciate the information that was provided earlier, and we certainly would support a program to true up the temporary pathway gallons once the full pathway has been deemed complete. We've heard from a number of producers that there's definitely a sort of crunch time in being able to go to market when they decide to start to market their low carbon biofuels. So I think this in particular would definitely help. The second point to make is around corn kernel fiber pathways in particular. As this technology comes online in the near future, the volumes of this fuel that successfully reduces significant amounts of greenhouse gases is likely to grow. Currently, the regulations impose a a resampling of cellulosic conversion every 500,000 gallons of production. At many facilities, just to pass along, this means resampling every 2 to 3 weeks and can create a significant burden on the facility and limit adoption and generation of these pathways in California. So just really quick, our comment would be in support of considering moving this regulation instead to perhaps resample every 1 million gallons of cellulosic production, and just something to consider. I think it would definitely open up some more producers that would be interested in accessing the pathway. Thank you guys very much.
Hey, David, this is Anil. For the LCFS, we have basically accepted the EPA guidelines on it. So I don't know if you've had any discussions with the EPA on this issue, but you're more than welcome to submit the comments. And since you're one of the larger producers of these enzymes, we can have more of these discussions. And ultimately, we want to try and harmonize our program with the EPA to the extent possible, because they have similar verification programs. And hopefully, if you've had some of these discussions with the EPA, we can have those conversations. But please provide feedback in your comments to this workshop.
Glenn Cho, please, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thanks, Stephen. My name is Glenn Cho. I'm with Toyota Motors North America. On slide 45, I know the team offered using MFAC as a source of data for the base credit generation, but could you elaborate that further? I mean, probably at the next meeting, so kind of give us an idea how you're going to use this data. The other data sets, I think they're all more historical data set. MFAC is more of a projection base, and like the vehicle sales between MFAC 2017 versus 2020X, there's a wide variance. So we're just wondering how would you use MFAC as a for the future use. So again, it's just a comment and a request.
Yeah, thank you for that. Today we were just presenting the data sources that we've heard from various stakeholders. So your feedback is important. So ask that you provide that, and that would be helpful to our discussion on evaluating what is the best data source to use. Thank you.
Andrew Craig, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. Yep, this is Andrew Craig with California Bioenergy. We are a developer of dairy digester projects. And again, wanted to thank you for hosting this workshop and giving the opportunity to comment on these important program updates. And first wanted to say, yeah, definitely support the credit true-ups that were proposed here. Appreciate staff's recognition of this issue, and agree with Sam Wade's comments that as the CIs fluctuate over the years, having a system to have ongoing true-ups as the CIs change, we would certainly be in favor of that, and allowing the value to be realized and the increased accuracy with that approach. And there was some discussion on the hydrogen tier 1 model, but I was wondering, are any of the other GREET models going to be updated? Will there be an opportunity to provide feedback on the dairy and swine GREET model? We have some ideas about how to streamline and standardize it so that it could be more broadly adopted, and make use of the tier 1 approach, which should also alleviate some of staff's time and resources that's required on the tier 2. So that's the first question. The second question is CARB considering a negative or a temporary CI for the electric LCFS dairy pathway? Because I believe one does not currently exist. So yeah, appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Yeah, staff are looking at other updates that are needed, so certainly open to feedback on the other calculators to make them more useful and more streamlined. So we'll be looking at additional updates over the next several months, and we'll provide more information at a future workshop. But open to your comments and look forward to your feedback. Thank you.
Jamie Donath, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, hi, it's Jamie Donat from Greenscape Financial. Our company aggregates, monetizes, and finances carbon credits, including LCFS credits generated from electric off-road industrial equipment, including electric forklifts. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on CARB's proposals as part of the upcoming rulemaking. I apologize that I was not able to make the previous workshop as I was traveling out of the country. But if you'll forgive me, I did want to address the proposal on electric forklifts that was discussed at the prior meeting in early July. And then it was mentioned a few minutes ago in a previous comment on today's call. The point I wanted to make was that the proposal to halt FSC registrations on electric forklifts post 2025 seems rather unhelpful for the LCFS program in general, and CARB in particular in a number of ways. Number one, in regards to the changeover from carbon-based forklifts to zero-emission forklifts in the state of California, the work is far from finished with only an estimated 50% penetration within the state. There's still an awful lot of propane-based forklifts out there. And so doing away with the program within the next couple of years, I think is going to do damage to that changeover. Secondly, getting rid of the incentives of switching to electric is only going to prolong the existence of that propane fleet. I think there was some discussion about prohibiting it by 2035 in the lack, if you're going to have the lack of economic incentives, as I say, you're going to have a lot of owner-operators of propane-based forklifts who are going to hold on to those machines as long as possible, which I don't think is what CARB is intending. And then finally, the change in the program really does have the potential to create significant damage to other biofuels within the LCFS, where regulators like CARB are relying on the private sector to make significant investments. I've had the pleasure of listening in person to Richard and Cheryl, and even I think Matt discussed it in his comments up front today, discuss the need to create visibility and certainty in order for private sector players such as ourselves to make the kind of significant investments that are required to be a participant and a facilitator in this market. The proposal on electric forklifts, unfortunately, really flies in the face of these statements and the intention to create that visibility. In fact, it does damage to the visibility and the confidence level of private sector investors. In fact, I can only imagine what investors in other fuels like biodiesel and RNG are thinking right now as they've made significant investments in project finance and other long-term projects, and now wondering if there's potential risks to the financial projections that they've laid out and in many instances borrowed against. In regards to the specific proposal on forklifts, there is a lot that remains unclear, which I'm hoping the CARB will clarify in the not too distant future. For instance, will credit generation still be allowed from existing registered sites? Is that going to be grandfathered in under the proposal, or is there simply going to be no credit generation from electric forklifts post 2025? I guess what I'm trying to say is the feeling is that in introducing this proposal, which was fairly unexpected, it feels like CARB is changing the rules in the middle of the game, and it leaves myself and a lot of my peers wondering why would CARB look to penalize a program that is actually working quite well. Certainly, if CARB and others are concerned about recent weakness in LCFS credit prices in the open market, surely there must be better ways to boost the price of these credits, rather than targeting a niche which has really been a model of successful partnership between the public and private sectors. That's all I want to say, but I did want to say thank you again for the opportunity to comment, and certainly if helpful, I'm happy to submit our comments in written form, and obviously welcome your thoughts and feedback. Thank you.
Great, thanks for your thoughts, and we look forward to your comments.
Mark Ventura, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Yes, thank you. This is Mark Ventura with Phillips 66. Appreciate the discussion on revision of the process for fuel pathway application and review. So in addition to the proposal that was presented today in terms of truing up credits, the temporary pathway with provisional or final pathway, we agree with that, and along with other people who spoke before me. One thing in addition I would like CARB to consider seriously is on the revisions, on the reviews of the pathway application, whether it's the review of the pathway application that goes before the third-party verifier or even after the pathway is actually verified. There should be a deadline, a timing allotted for CARB to review that. For instance, 30 days. If after 30 days, CARB has not taken any position or any feedback, then the pathway should be deemed certified automatically. Because as you probably have experienced other pathways sitting extended period of time, and then therefore some pathway being even expired and having to do the process all over again, it doesn't help obviously the applicant, but I don't think it helps CARB, because you have to go back through reconsidering a temporary pathway, reconsidering a provisional pathway, redoing the verification. So it's like this infinite loop of pathway application with no end in sight. So there should really be a timing deadline by which CARB should review the pathway. And if CARB does not review the pathway or does not speak up, then the pathway should be deemed certified. Thank you for your consideration, and happy to discuss here. And I will submit that. We'll submit that in writing.
Hey, Mark, thanks for that comment. I just want to call upon, the experience that definitely my team, and I'm sure Ray will agree with me on this. So let's take up specifically on the tier twos, right? Tier twos are more complex, and once it comes back with validation, the engineering review post-validation at times takes a longer time. There are situations which are uncovered as part of the validation that requires specific operating conditions to get to final consideration for certification. There's also comments that come up as part of the posting for public comments, and these are quite challenging in several instances. It requires not just my review, it requires my supervisor, and many instances definitely up to executive management. So the fact that you're asking for some very defined timeline is kind of hard. Now internally, I'm working with my supervisor, and Ray is doing the same, to try and get a metric on how we can streamline the process, which is why we're asking for some feedback. But the definitive thing on that 30-day is kind of boxing us by saying, if this is a very complicated situation, you're automatically getting certification. That's a little bit of a harder thing to swallow, but we can have these conversations and figure out how to streamline the process rather than saying automatic certification. I mean, again, I'm just saying, let's say there's some very complicated application, and then effectively, are we certifying without really getting a good assessment of the carbon footprint of that facility and process? Anyway, we'll listen to your comments. We'll do a lot of the streamlining, so hopefully something that can be addressed can be done much faster and not necessarily take significant time post-validation.
Just to let everyone know, there are 15 people left in queue. Next question, Bang Feng, your mic has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Hi, this is Bang Feng with Los Angeles Power and Water Power. I just have 2 clarifying questions for the verification proposal. So is the residential base credit estimation part of the transactions that would be required verification? And then my second question, the exemption threshold of 6,000 credits, is that for exemption from verification, or is that a threshold for a deferred verification?
On the base credits, that is an estimation methodology, so those would not be subject to the verification requirements that we're discussing today. And Greg or
yeah, this is
David?
Greg. It would be an exemption from verification, not just a deferral, is what we are proposing.
Shane Pekowitz, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. My name is Margaret Lopp. I'm with Energy. I believe I probably signed in under my colleague Shane's login link. So good morning, my name is Margaret Lopp with Energia. Thank you for having me. Energia specializes in biomethane generation from landfill diverted organics. And thanks for the opportunity to comment this morning. Energia is very supportive of the proposed updates to the Tier 1 CI calculator emissions factor. And specifically, we want to highlight the need to update the landfill capture rate from the current assumption of 75% methane emission capture from landfill. There's a growing body of evidence from a number of preeminent and peer-reviewed sources indicating that landfill emissions are significantly higher than what's currently assumed in the calculator. Accurate landfill emissions factor is essential to accurately quantifying the CI score of landfill diverted organics and to incentivizing biomethane from landfill diverted organics as a critical tool in climate change mitigation. So we will certainly provide some written comment with reference to the scientific and peer-reviewed data sets, and we look forward to continuing to work with staff to appropriately update this critical emissions factor with respect to landfill capture. So thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Oscar Garcia, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Hi, good morning. My name is Oscar Garcia with Nesti. First of all, thank you for hosting this workshop today. Another great LCFS workshop, and I greatly appreciate all of the information. I do want to show support for the proposal to true up the pathways. And Nesti is also supportive of prior comments expressing a need to true up the pathways on an annual basis. That will, I think, generate additional incentives to ensure that the generators
It appears that his audio has cut out, so we will get back to him if he hops back online. Next, we have Marcelo Moreira. Your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Thank you. My name is Marcelo Moreira. I'm talking from Brazil. I have two comments today. One is regarding database and improvements in emission factors. So we are helping Brazilian producers to build their database with a primary data, and now we have more than a few thousand properties, rural properties, with primary data that has been audited by third parties. So this is a very valuable database which we intend to share with you. And my question regarding this is how is the deadline and how you would like this database to be provided so we can work together and give this as the best way possible. The second question, the second comment I see I knew now the database has both sugarcane and second crop corn inside this database. Okay. The second comment is much more from our experience in Corsia, right? We have had a lot of discussions last 4 or 5 years within this group. iLook continues to be a major uncertainty. You know, NGOs have different views from producers, from countries, and so on. And it will remain uncertain. We have ways, and CARB has helped to develop ways to deal with that. But on the other hand, there is very good agreement between all in the room. You know, we have several different countries over there, several specialists, different specialists, and all agree that as important as the pathway is how the crop is produced. So I heard earlier Robert talking about regenerative agriculture, which is very important. In Brazil, for example, if the expansion is under degraded pastureland or in cropland, it is also very important. And so far, we see some advances in Corsia in that side. So helping to identify the ones that could do the best management possible. And this is lacking here in the Lcfs. So my suggestion is that we could go forward and help to enlighten producers on the best way they should produce their crops on behalf of the planet. Thank you.
Hey, Marcelo, this is Anil Prabhu. Thanks for that feedback. And with respect to data sets, it's always we're always willing to look at all the data that you can provide. If you have a large enough database and if it's not perfectly in the public domain, we also have opportunities for us to review that. But at the end of the day, if we sort of incorporate that into the Lcfs framework, we may still need that to be, at least in the aggregate, to go out into the public domain. I wasn't very clear. I mean, the second half of your discussion or your comments wasn't very clear, so I just didn't get a clear sense of. I know you were involved with Corsia, but if it's all related to data, please send that as part of your comments. If you can include that as part of your comment, please reach out to me and we'll figure out a way to for you to provide that information to us. Thanks, Marcelo.
Oscar Garcia, you're back, and we have please, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself to continue.
Hey, thank you. Sorry, I had some internet issues there. My apologies. So once again, Oscar Garcia from Nesti. I just wanted to show my support for the true up of the pathways. And I also believe that the comments made around doing the annual true up would generate incentives to further reduce this pathway CIs on an ongoing basis. So I think there would be some benefits there for the greenhouse, in terms of greenhouse gas reductions. I also would like to encourage CARB to consider pathway reciprocity, as currently Oregon and now hopefully Washington will be doing. That definitely is a pretty good administrative streamlining effort. And I think I'll leave it at that. We will be submitting more comments, and just would like to thank CARB for this great workshop. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to remind folks that we are looking for specific feedback and comments for some of these concepts that we're thinking about. So if you have specifics on how implementation would work on some of these, we'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Todd Trauman, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Thanks, Stephen. Hello, everyone. My name is Todd Trauman from Emission Control. We are a SaaS technology company that focuses on building software that helps facilitate access to clean fuel programs throughout the West Coast, mostly on behalf of fleets deploying electric equipment and vehicles. Just want to say thank you to CARB and the Lcfs team for all of your continued efforts in getting feedback from stakeholders during this workshop process. I've got 3 quick questions, mostly related. Regarding the potential phasing out of deter technologies like forklifts. As was reiterated today, the LCFS team received a lot of commentary coming out against that philosophy, both in the verbal and written comments in the last workshop. So I'm curious if we can get a commitment from CARB to address this at or before the next workshop. And then regarding verification of ETRUs, e-cargo handling equipment, and e-OGVs, I think we all agree that extra visibility into data submission is important, but I'm curious if CARB could get into a little bit more detail on what verification means in this case, just because, as Patrick mentioned, a lot of these transaction types are using a lookup table grid CI or book and claim 0 CI in submitting meter data. So I'm curious, what does verification really mean here? Is that an audit of meter reports, or is that something more detailed like on-site surveys, or what does that entail? And then kind of relatedly, and finally, I'm curious about if verification will be applied to designees, and considering, depending on how you look at it, 80 to 99% of the FSE registrations in those same categories are done by designees on behalf of small generators. So I ask because even if verification costs are borne by designees and not the small generators, the LCFS team may still find a pretty significant deterrent in helping facilitate access for small generators to the program. Thank you.
So this is Greg, Mayor. So the way verification currently exists in the regulation is it requires a site visit to the facility. If this is something that is an issue for designees, something that we can definitely consider. But currently, it does require a site visit, does require a full verification, including reviewing by risk, reviewing by uncertainty, verifier completing the verification report and providing a statement to CARB. But if you could provide additional comments on this, it would be appreciated. Thank you.
Jim Verberg, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Yeah, hi, everybody. This is Jim Verberg from Western States Petroleum Association. Just wanted to tell you, Cheryl, and your staff that we appreciate you putting on these workshops in the rulemaking process. They're very helpful in getting issues identified early and opening dockets so that we can file comments. And so I'll be brief today. We look forward to filing comments on these proposals. And just like has been said, we've heard from a couple of our members today, on the credit on the credit true up, we would likely support Sam Wade's proposal for a full true up, but we will be providing comments, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in the workshop today.
Thank you.
Adam Browning, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Hey, thank you. This is Adam Browning with Forum Mobility. We're a heavy-duty ZEV solution provider in the drayage space. And I appreciate the words at the beginning, setting the stage for the reasons for why we're doing this, the urgency of climate change, and aligning this program with the state's and the governor's goals. And I'd just like to ask a question from the outset where, CARB's fleet mandates now and upcoming are for zero emission vehicle solutions. The governor's direction is clearly for ZEV solutions. Yet right now, we've seen, this is going to be, it's going to require a seismic change in vehicles and infrastructure going forward. 75% of the heavy duty fleet are owner operator. There's just many individual livelihoods that are in the balance right now. And right now, we've seen a huge cratering in LCF values due principally to the increase in book and claim renewable diesel and biomethane, and that is making electrification much more difficult. And I'm just wondering if perhaps it's time to think about getting rid of book and claim altogether, limiting crop-based biofuels, and aligning this program with the overall goals of the state in support of a zero emission vehicle solution. Is that something that could be discussed?
Yes, we can. Yeah, we can absolutely talk about those things. I'm not sure if anyone else has anything to say on that, but appreciate your comment.
Angela Richards, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question. Angela? All right, we'll get back to Angela. Callie Oburn, please, your microphone has been activated. Please feel free to ask your question.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This is Callie Oburn with Capture 6, a direct air capture startup in California. Specifically, I'm interested in understanding how, if it's possible to generate LCFS credits if there's a hybrid facility, as in if there's a direct air capture facility paired with a fuel-based sequestration project. I know there are those two different kind of pathways, but if the two facilities are kind of built together in tandem, what sort of questions that might pose, and if that's something that the LCFS plans to address in the new iterations. And then also wanted to ask a question about the CCS protocol, specifically around mineralization and CO2 sequestration sites. I know that the way it's defined now that they have to be reservoirs or used for enhanced oil recovery, but I wanted to ask if there is a solid to be deposited instead of a gas, how the CCS protocol could be revised and what plans there are around that to incorporate mineralization and especially around the storage if it demonstrates permanence. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and happy to talk about individual projects separately. So we know that the CCS projects have a lot of specific details in them, so would be happy to have a conversation about that. Regarding any other updates to potential updates that staff are considering, including to the CCS protocol, we would be discussing them in a public workshop later on. I don't have much to say on that at this moment, but certainly if we're contemplating that, that would be in an open forum. So feel free to connect with us on an individual project, though. Thank you.
Colin Suarez, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Thank you. This is more of a comment. My name is Colin Suarez. I'm speaking on behalf of the Western Propane Gas Association, Propane Trade Association here in California. I do want to thank the CARB staff for the presentations and the discussions we've had with stakeholders. I'd also like to align my comments with some of the people speaking before me about the true-up. I'd also like to flag a couple of key items I hope do get incorporated into the rulemaking process. So we do believe very strongly it's important to keep any language strictly technology neutral and outcome oriented. There are some concerns we have about modeling for base cases using technologies that have not been fully developed, or those that set an artificially high CI for select fuels that are currently in the market. I think this ties into why the true-up, I think, is a very strongly needed aspect of LCFS. If the goal is to reduce CI across transportation fuels, then it seems the ability to adopt easy transition technologies should be a consideration as part of CARB modeling. And I'm thinking about, in particular, the draft forklift rule, which has already been discussed previously. Second, speaking of transportation fuels, it is clear that any rule on LCFS will affect the entire statewide market for fuels generally, regardless of sector and across numerous regulatory structures, including the SIP. The tail wagging the dog, so to speak. So there are certainly technologies and fuels which are unique to a specific industry or sector, but renewable fuels, and I'm here speaking on behalf of the renewable low CI propane fuels, can be utilized across numerous sectors, on-duty, off-duty, commercial, residential. There needs to be some recognition of reality in the reg that those fuels meeting CI targets in one sector should not be held to separate standards for another sector. And I would like to thank staff for their work taking steps towards this goal by working in tandem on the updated scoping plan. Third, we do believe it's important that there is an equity in the treatment of low CI fuels and technologies, especially in how renewable fuels are conveyed across California. If renewable fuels are treated to stringent life cycle analysis, we would hope that other energy resources would receive equal scrutiny by CARB staff and consultants. We recognize that renewable fuels derived from different feedstocks can produce different CIs, but we also know that the marginal electricity for California's electrical grid, as currently modeled, may not reflect its actual CI. And we do have some interesting data on marginal grid emissions that I will reference in a written letter. I believe it is important that those who will be purchasing fuels, technologies, and equipment, that they are able to purchase from a market that is regulated by an apples-to-apples comparison. We'd hope you take those comments under advisement. Be happy to provide staff with additional comments, technical information, and research, especially on the pathway modeling that has become so crucial to the total efficacy of the regulation. We'd also like to say that the CI of certain renewable feedstocks are changing on a very rapid pace as the technology is maturing. And so all that more speaks to the need for a more regularly formalized true up on those, incorporating those feedstock CIs into the modeling. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gerard Ostheimer, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Thank you very much. My name is Gerard Ostheimer, and I co-manage the Clean Energy Ministerial BioFuture campaign. You might have heard a little bit about the Clean Energy Ministerial recently because the U.S. Department of Energy this year is hosting the Global Clean Energy Action Forum this September in Pittsburgh. And I encourage all of the participants in this call to consider attending, as it will be a premier clean energy event globally this year. The Clean Energy Ministerial has over 26 countries, and it's really focused on driving the clean energy transition across the spectrum of technologies. We're very happy now to have a BioFuture component to the Clean Energy Ministerial. And I have just a couple more comments. I lead the industry engagement with the BioFuture platform, and we are very, something that has emerged very organically is really communicating the benefits of intelligent and thorough carbon intensity-based policies, such as those implemented by you, CARB. And I want to echo everyone for the excellent session today, and for overall all the hard work that you're trying to do and all the different interests that you're trying to balance. So basically, we would like to work with you. We would like to showcase all of your efforts and your approaches, and we'd like to facilitate engagement with various international processes. I did note that you do take into account comments from IEA, FAO, and other international bodies, but we think that California leadership in the decarbonization effort could be even greater recognized, and we would like to help with that. I would also like to echo some of the remarks from some of our members, such as Novozymes and others, on the importance of taking into account a lot of the progress that is being made around climate smart agriculture and the potential for soils to act as carbon reservoirs. And so we will be looking to work more closely with you, and thank you for the opportunity to comment, and well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Graham Noyes, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Thank you, Stephen. Graham Noyes, I'm the Executive Director of the Low Carbon Fuels Coalition. We are a rapidly growing trade association with our central mission being the support and expansion of low carbon fuel policies. We've always been a big advocate and supporter for California's LCFS and have worked in Oregon and Washington and New Mexico and New York and many other states to expand LCFS policies nationwide, and also worked with Gerard on the international front. So we really commend CARB for the success of the low carbon fuel standard and for this public engagement. We recognize also that the success of this program has brought a lot of attention to it, a tremendous number of attendees here, and lots of diverse opinions. So we appreciate the challenges you face out there. Most of my comments and questions today really focus on climate smart agriculture, which is something that's been brought up repeatedly here. The coalition worked with many stakeholders, organizations, trade associations, and companies to put together a climate smart agriculture letter with 20 signatories on it, expressing some principles and requesting the inclusion of climate smart agriculture in this rulemaking. Based on my review of the comments to date and the participation, this appears to be one of the top, if not the top, issue for industry. And it's an area that's been widely recognized in multiple reports in terms of the potential of soil to store carbon. And you can see that in CARB Zone Scoping Plan, as well as the Lawrence Livermore National Labs getting a neutral report, and NRDC's doing a great, done a great deal of work in this area as well. Because the LCFS is so important to the biofuels market, it provides CARB and the opportunity to send a really powerful market signal to accelerate the adoption of climate smart agriculture. It's happening out there already, but the LCFS can really advance that. And consistent with Matt's comments and framing of this entire workshop, given that we have such an ambitious goal of carbon neutrality and such an essential goal of carbon neutrality by 2045, we really need to tap into the potential of soil to reach that goal. All of that said, we recognize there are real complexities in doing this. We've had serious conversations with CARB and appreciate those regarding concerns around how to do the verifications, how to be sure to maintain program integrity, how to not overload CARB staff with this. And the industry stands really ready and willing to work with CARB to find a structure that is feasible. We do want to recognize that what CARB has shared in this workshop regarding its willingness to integrate all of these different models, both US-based and international-based, as well as data sets that Anil was speaking to, scientific analysis as grounds. All of those things are very important in terms of updating the LCA model, the California GREET model. And as Gerard and I think others have also pointed out, Marcelo also spoke to this, the importance of aligning these programs so that these different programs are sending consistent market signals out to the market. This is really apparent in the sustainable aviation fuel space in particular, where CORSIA matters to producers, as well as the CARB LCFS, as well as what happens on the blender's tax credit and on the US EPA front. So the first question I have is for Cheryl, and that is really the question of, is climate smart agriculture truly on the agenda for this workshop, or not for this workshop, but for this rulemaking, and how is the best opportunity to engage? We think having a separate track, really a track dedicated to that, or at least a workshop dedicated to that, would be really beneficial given the complexity of the area. And then my second question is for Matt, and it goes to the goal of carbon neutrality. Was quite concerned to hear that we're sort of again perhaps delayed by the scoping plan process. I took the draft scoping plan as a really clear indication that the LCFS needs to go farther and faster, both before 2030 and after 2030. And then if that wasn't enough, the governor's letter to Chair Randolph made that very clear as well. We know from all the climate science that early action is necessary. And unfortunately, the slide in credit prices is really causing damage to the industry out there. And if we're waiting for months or years to get to the point where CI reductions kick in, we're going to lose projects. We're going to lose gallons. We're going to lose electrification. We really have a market that has had tremendous confidence in this program, and the longer we wait, the more worrisome it becomes. So the question for Matt is, how can we solve what has become a really ironic problem of waiting for the scoping plan to do what the LCFS needs to do? Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. I'll take these. So I think on the ag practices, we have gotten a lot of feedback on those, and as we've talked about before, that would be a future consideration. So it's not off the table, but we have talked about a lot of the nuances that would need to be incorporated, and so welcome the comments to further consider that. Nothing more specific to say on that today. Regarding carbon neutrality and the, sorry, I'm not on here, and the timing of the scoping plan, there's not an anticipated delay right now. So staff are still anticipating updating the draft document. So we always go through a draft document, present it to the board, have more public discussions, and then bring it back to the board for consideration for adoption. So that process is still going on. We did get the governor's letter. We got direction from the board for additional things to consider, and that's part of that normal process of presenting staff's draft and then revising it. So as far as I understand it, and I've heard nothing different than this, is to continue to make those revisions and present a final draft this year and go to the board this year. So we're all very excited to have the scoping plan adopted and be able to move forward as quickly as possible. So we definitely understand the need to move forward on LCFS, and that we have the opportunity to do so given its great performance. And so that's why we're here, to try to have these conversations early on, a consideration so that we can be thinking about them as we watch the scoping plan. But for right now, I don't see any, I'm not anticipating delays in the scoping plan. So we're hoping that we can move forward as we've talked about before. Thank you.
Jamie Katz, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question. Jamie, I see that your microphone is active and you're not muted, but we can't hear you. All right, we'll get back to Jamie. Next up, Kevin George, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Yeah, hi, thank you. This is Kevin George from Rise Energy Services. I think like everybody else, I just want to thank the folks from CARB for running the workshop today. It was really good information. I have a simple question. I was just wondering if anyone from CARB can provide an update on the 2022 verifier accreditation training that is, I think, tentatively scheduled for Q4.
I'm not sure, but I can have staff get back to you. So yeah, I'm not sure what the schedule is right now. I'm sorry, but I'll connect with staff and we can update you on that.
Tom Van Heeke, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Thanks. Good morning, Tom Van Heeke with Rivian Automotive. Like everyone else, just want to start by thanking staff for hosting this workshop. These are always really helpful, and do appreciate the chance to listen and learn here early in the process. Just with respect to staff's consideration of changes to the methodology for calculating base credits. Rivian just wants to note that we think that consideration is appropriate. It's well worth taking a close look at this. We've mentioned this in previous written feedback to the board as well, but if done right, our view is that leveraging telematics promises benefits that would enhance the LCFS's contribution to the state's overall climate response as well as EV market growth. But just a quick question for you all. You indicated in the presentation that reporting for incremental credits may be limited over time as the grid average declines. With that in mind, has CARB considered how they might incentivize ongoing participation in LCFS by stakeholders that may only generate incremental credits currently, especially if they are proposed to be a source of data for ongoing calculations?
I'm not sure if staff have looked at that concept, so happy to have comments from you, but yeah, I don't have much to say on that at this point. Thank you.
Angela Richards, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question. Okay, still no luck there. Let's move on to Christopher Templeman. Your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Thank you. Andre or Christopher Templeman from Alpha Inception. A couple of questions, I guess. Our modeling shows that, cumulative credits by about 2025 get over 40 million under current trends. So the question kind of comes up, has CARB considered, in addition to potentially moving mature technologies off of LCFS or sort of sunsetting them, moving to bifurcated credits similar to RINs, where, something like renewable diesel that might hit a very high penetration level by 25 or 26 would get a different type of LCFS credit. I do understand that initially the program was trying to be technology neutral, and that made sense, but as certain fuel stocks move to majority renewable, it might make sense to bifurcate as an alternative or another consideration instead of moving certain technologies or fuel sources off of LCFS. I think the other consideration when looking at LCFS and what's considered mature, looking at which fuel sources or which credit sources are currently double dipping and getting substantial revenues from, say, the blender's tax credit or the RINs market as another consideration to determine sort of the value of that within the LCFS program. One comment I would make, I guess, is that low credit prices are sort of a feature of a market, and in this case, probably speak to the program being over successful. And so in and of themselves, low credit prices are just what you'd expect if the program was overproducing credits, which it is. And so not necessarily a bad thing, but more of a feature of a market. And then last question, how early could the CI changes be implemented in terms of actual implementation? 23, 24, midway through 23? What's the thinking there? And that's my last question. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Appreciate comments on the mature technology. So, as we've talked about before, it would be a conversation about what are the mature technologies, what require additional support. We certainly do understand that we allow stacking of incentives from programs for certain fuels, including the RIN. So I think that we take that into consideration, but would be certainly interested in hearing your thoughts about your proposal. So look forward to that. And then as far as when a CI target could be effective, so as we've talked about, and the slide up front talks about the timing, a formal rulemaking takes a year. And so that's where this conversation about the scoping plan and its timing is part of this discussion, because we really can't get too far ahead of the scoping plan, or we can't get ahead of it at all. We need to take our direction from the scoping plan. And so that's why these informal discussions are important, so we can have staff be looking at the changes that we might want to make in a formal process. And once the scoping plan is adopted, then we can move into a formal rulemaking process. So once we enter into that, that would still take a year because of requirements in California on our public process and all of the things that we need to go through on things like APA procedures. So, so 2023 really is not a possible date for a CI target adjustment. So the earliest that we see a rulemaking becoming implemented is in 2024. So we're trying to set ourselves up to be successful to move forward quickly in once the scoping plan is finalized. And so encourage you to look back at the slide on that process and the timing, but 2024 would be the soonest for CI target, new targets to be effective. Thank you.
Brad Neff, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, super. This is Brad Neff with Radical out of Calgary, Canada, and we're working with alternative fuel producers to develop CIs for some of the most forward-thinking low-carbon fuels. And these innovators are often looking for funding, which depends heavily on the financial benefits of what I see to be a very successful climate program in LCFS. And so appreciate your efforts, including us in the discussion with this workshop today. When I talk to many of these clients about temporary pathways, it actually causes concerns. These numbers are conservative by nature, but they're so conservative, in fact, that they destroy any economic benefit of an innovative project when doing the financial modeling, which is, of course, used to pitch projects to potential funders. And it seems to me like the temporary pathway CIs were intended to help innovators, but in many cases, it feels like it's having the opposite impact, raising questions about what the final CI will be. And it's a hurdle for us to get over and to explain as we talk about what goes into a CI and so forth, and what that final CI could be. And so I wonder if there may be a better solution, and really on 2 points, because as you mentioned, there is already a true up. If that temporary pathway CI is too low, then those credits that have been generated that shouldn't have been after that period need to be returned to CARB. So it seems like the risk of having too low of this conservatism maybe has gone a little too far, and I'm wondering if there may be opportunity to revisit that. And secondly, with all the experience that CARB now has with pathways, is there room maybe to go down a level of detail to provide more accurate CIs for pathways that go beyond the traditional assumptions used to derive the current set of temporary pathway CIs that are at a very high general level? And I'll just point out too that since we do have many clients on multiple sides of these issues, we won't be making written comments, but we'll work through our clients to make those comments and invite anybody here who agrees to include this in their comments as well.
Hey, good morning. This is Anil Prabhu. I've been part of the Pathways team forever in the LCFS, and based upon our experiences, our temporaries are not too conservative. Yes, we do notice occasionally there is a provider that is, performing really well, and it ends up being quite significant. But in many instances, we do have these occasional situations where it gets really close to those temporaries. The intent of the temporary, and let me just call that out very clearly, is when you start your fuel production process and when you have an application currently under review, you're not eligible to generate credits. This is sort of an approach to saying we'll give you some part of the credits that is due to you, but not essentially handicap the program by being very generous and then having to try to claw back. If you looked at the slide where we talked about the true up, the true up would be, at least currently as we are putting it out there for consideration, is when you have operational data that is coincident with the temporary fuel pathway true up. So during initial startup, many processes are not anywhere close to steady state operation. So it's quite likely the carbon intensity of that fuel will be much higher than when it is actually operation. Now, the reason we're bringing up this true up is once you're operational and you're at steady state and there is a finite time between getting your pathway validated, that is where we give you the opportunity to get your credits back, which is why we're asking for feedback on the implementation part. But clearly there is a certain part of the process where you do not have operational data, which is there really we do not want to compromise the integrity of the program. So if you wanted to have additional discussions, we can do it offline, but it's quite likely, we're not going to change our position on the where we stand on the temporaries.
Yeah, thanks, Anil. I'll just add that, yeah, the temporaries offer that early credit generation opportunity. And so we understand that there's investments happening in these projects. And so it provides that opportunity for early credit generation while production ramps up. And they are conservative values. And so for investors, trying to determine projects to invest in, that can help guide what the final CIs look like, but they are conservative. We do also post certified CIs to our website, and so folks can see what we have certified in the past as a general guide for how pathways might fare in the CI score. So I think that those are signals that we provide to the market and opportunities for early credit generation that are useful for the program. Thank you.
Jamie Katz, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Thank you so much, and apologies for the technical difficulties earlier. Yes, my name is Jamie Katz. I'm a staff attorney with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, calling in from Fresno today. We will follow up with written comments, but want to provide a few high-level comments today. Wanted to elevate that we would like to see pathways for hydrogen limited to those derived from electrolytic hydrogen powered by solar or wind, and those used for non-combustion applications. Next, we welcome the update to the life cycle analysis modeling, and we would urge CARB to look at both the upstream and downstream emissions from manure-derived factory farm gas pathways, including enteric emissions and the cropland application of digestate. Finally, with regard to proposals to streamline applications, it seems that today comments came primarily from pathway applicants and deficit generators. We're concerned that the proposal signals an intent to speed up the process. We agree with the urgency to move quickly. However, rushing to certify artificially inflated credits does not serve that purpose. We urge CARB to measure twice and cut once. And given significant concerns that we and others have raised, we continue to call on CARB to pause the certification of pathway application for factory farm gas until those issues are resolved. And then to streamlining more generally, we call for additional time for stakeholders to provide comments. Currently, on applications, stakeholders are provided merely 10 days in order to review complex applications and provide comments, incorporating the perspectives of local residents. So additional time would be welcome in order to make this a transparent process. And speaking of transparency, we're already concerned about the significant redactions in applications, in pathway applications, of relevant data to evaluate the extent to which these pathway applications are serving the purpose of reducing emissions. And so we would urge that CARB not further sacrifice the need for transparency for the purpose of intending to move more quickly. And so we'll follow up with more detail in our written comments, but I appreciate this, the opportunity to provide comments today.
Thank you. Look forward to the comments. And just to be clear, our streamlining efforts would absolutely be to maintain the integrity of the program. And so looking for opportunities to both move efficiently to meet our climate goals and advance alternative fuel deployment, but also maintaining the high integrity of the program. So look forward to your comments. Thank you.
Brian Sievers, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Good afternoon. My name is Brian Sievers. I am a farmer, a anaerobic digester owner and operator, and a feedlot owner and operator from Eastern Iowa. And thank you so much to CARB and the Lcfs team for hosting this webinar today for the workshop that is currently underway for the review of the Lcfs program. I serve as Vice Chair of the American Biogas Council, and we have been working very, very hard as an organization and also through several committees that I serve on with the American Biogas Council, specifically the Agricultural Committee, in working on issues that impact on-farm anaerobic digesters as well as other applications of anaerobic digestion and biogas production. I want to give a shout out to our co-chairs on that committee, Mark Sturman, who is with Nutrient, and Natalie Hoffman, who is with Lcfs Consulting out of California, as my co-chairs on the Ag Committee. And we have worked very hard. In fact, the comments that we submitted here recently after the last meeting on July 7th, I think summarized the ABC's position. And I do want to also say basically, Graham Noyes and your comments with the Lcfs Coalition, we echo those comments and are in full support of those things that you indicated. I did want to point out a couple of things though with regard to the letter that we sent. I want to highlight a few items that I think are very important from an agricultural production perspective. So let me just quickly go through this. In our letter that we sent to Chair Randolph, I identified that we believe the carbon reduction targets should become more stringent. We think that there should be some interim 5-year CI targets post 2030. And getting back to that first priority or request is we really believe that 30% reduction by 2030 is going to be very productive and helpful for not only enhancing and improving air quality in the state of California, but also allowing the anaerobic digestion and biogas production industry to help grow and meet the demand that will be available should those reduction targets become more stringent. We would like to see a phase in of the more stringent CI reduction targets, if at all possible. Make the carbon intensity targets more stringent outside of a full rulemaking. And that goes back to a December 7th workshop that was held that CARB staff stated that it would not be making reductions in the CI targets until the full amendment goes into effect. But we would ask that possibly you would reconsider that and allow those more stringent carbon intensity targets to take place sooner. We would request the amendment of the livestock offset protocol to expand the types of livestock manure that can generate avoided emissions credits. And more specifically, I refer to our type of anaerobic digester we have on our farm in Eastern Iowa, and that's a beef cattle facility. And our beef cattle manure is not eligible under the Tier 1 pathway criteria. And so as we transition our anaerobic digester from an electricity generating facility or CHP facility over to a renewable natural gas facility by late 2022, early 2023, the question is still up as to whether we'll be able to participate in the Lcfs. We know that our feedstocks in our digester from beef cattle manure and a new feedstock that will be adding biomass from cover crops, both perennial cover crops as well as winter hardy cover crops that we raise on our farms and our farmland, will be eligible under the Renewable Fuel Standards D3 RIN. And so we'll probably be focusing more on that particular program as far as generating the kinds of credits that we'll need in order for this particular facility to be successful in the future. A couple of other areas that I wanted to point on with regard to the governor's letter, when he talked about drastically reducing methane, Governor Newsom made the point that pollutants such as methane can also have an outsized impact on climate change in the near term, given their potent warming power. And he emphasized that he called for the input of community members, air districts, and local government entities to take action to address these methane leaks from the oil infrastructure. But this opportunity really is something that the biogas industry can address and answer that call as well by digesting not only animal manure, but also industrial food waste, as well as biomass to help meet those air quality improvements that are so necessary. We want to also look at potentially focusing more on carbon capture and sequestration. There's a lot of work that's being done on reducing CO2 emissions, and we think the anaerobic digestion industry is poised to be able to make great strides in enhancing sequestration of CO2 and the utilization of CO2 in specific projects as well. We know that staff challenges are always an issue at any level of government agencies, but we certainly would like to do whatever we can as an organization to speed up the fuel pathway certification process through the Lcfs program. So whatever we can do as an organization, we are here standing at the ready to help CARB advance that particular objective as well. We also think a book and claim pathway for biogas could really unlock the full potential of California's biogas market. And we have a specific member that is really advocating, in that particular member happens to be from California, advocating for that. And we think that that's a real opportunity to help enhance the program is through a book and claim pathway for biogas and specifically for EV pathways. But finally, the last two items I really wanted to talk on are things that are just near and dear to my heart, and that is the smart agricultural production practices or sustainable agriculture production practices. And again, Governor Newsom stated that California must look for greater opportunities to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels to achieve air quality and climate targets, including in our transportation sector. And it is just absolutely incredible what we're seeing here in our state, as well as the Midwest, as well as other areas of the country, and certainly in California, on how can we implement climate smart farming practices as a way to sequester carbon and improve our climate, air quality, and water quality. And so climate smart farming practices, we believe, really should be a part of that discussion as we go forward. And we stand at the ready to discuss this. There are obviously a number of incentives that have been put forth now by the Inflation Reduction Act recently passed that will help enhance agricultural producers to achieve some greater carbon sequestration of their in their soils and their farmland. And we support those efforts, and we think that those efforts at the USDA and federal level can help supplement those things that will be done in CARB and through the LCFS program. So climate smart farming production practices are those things that we're implementing on our farms. We think that they will be a tremendous opportunity for CARB and the LCFS program going forward. And that's really why we're looking at integrating biomass as a primary feedstock, along with our beef cattle manure in our anaerobic digesters. So again, thank you for all the work you've done to help improve these climate-friendly practices that have achieved great results thus far in California, and we want to be able to do that across the great United States so that we can help not only California meet its air quality goals, but also advance climate efforts throughout the United States. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan Huggins, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Great, thank you. I'm Ryan Huggins. I'm with PineSpire. We're an Lcfs service provider for a broad range of customers, including many small and medium-sized fleets in California that are looking to further electrify and looking at the Clean Fleets Rule and Zero Emission Forklift Rule and trying to figure out how to plan for compliance with those. It's a major concern for a lot of fleet owners out there. So in that vein, my questions are, one, just again, trying to understand the timeline for CARB to address the discussion around potentially sunsetting equipment like forklifts. I know there were a lot of comments and feedback provided, so I was wondering when you anticipate that being part of a specific workshop.
Yes, thank you. So the comment docket for our July workshop just recently closed, and staff are still going through those comments. So that's why we're not discussing those here today, as we're still evaluating those. But we'll certainly be reviewing those and developing additional thoughts on that. So it will be a topic for a future rulemaking, or not a future rulemaking, a future workshop discussion. Thank you.
Todd Campbell, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. My name is Todd Campbell. I represent Clean Energy, and I want to thank staff for providing this important LCFS update workshop. Clean Energy strongly supports Sam Wade's proposal for a full true up for credit generation and are encouraged by CARB's consideration of a full or partial true up. We see this as a very important improvement to help producers make future investments and make their investments whole. We also support expediting or streamlining the pathway certification process. Our renewables team will most likely or would love to meet with you or its staff and provide numerous suggestions on how the process may be expedited. And one suggestion that I know we've asked in the past is that if we could support CARB staff's workload by hiring third-party contractors to accelerate pathway certification. I know we would be more than happy to do this when it makes sense for key projects. We support CARB's consideration of the hydrogen pathways that use steam methane reforming. We believe recommendations to limit feedstocks for hydrogen pathways would be counter to the LCFS's founding principles of fuel neutrality and counter to the state's climate goals. The science should determine whether a fuel makes sense to produce or not politics. We are also encouraged by the book and claim considerations for RNG. We look forward to working with CARB staff on this effort in the coming months. We do not support eliminating or graduating technologies that may be viewed as mature, like electric yard hostlers referenced in the prior workshop. Certainty is very important for any rule, but especially for a rule that is not only working, but doing better than expected. And we should all be proud of that. We would alternatively recommend that CARB staff consider deeper targets in 2030 to 2045. As we know, even a 30% reduction in 2030, for example, is not enough if we're going to hit a carbon neutrality goal of 2045, as per the governor's even recent updated climate objectives. We would disagree and oppose one commenter's suggestion that you remove biofuels from the program entirely for a number of reasons, including the fact that a move or that such a move would support the governor's climate goals for the following reason. First, the governor's just renewed his commitment to meeting a 2045 carbon neutrality goal. Pair this with CARB's own projections of the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule on fleet makeup, specifically more than a third of the heavy-duty trucks on the road are expected in 2050 to remain on internal combustion engines, assuming that the ACF is implemented flawlessly. That means over 300,000 Class 8 trucks on the road will remain in 2050, and that is a significant number that should not be ignored, especially since 2050 is practically 3 decades away. Second, the governor's mandate or vision to transition to zero is where feasible. We would argue that with quite a bit of data behind our statements that heavy-duty trucks, trains, ships, planes, and other hard to decarbonize sources are nowhere near a pure transition or easy transition to zero-emission platforms. The LCFS is not only a critical climate tool for California, but it provides a real safety net just in case a transition to zero is a real bumpy one. Third, many fuels that currently power internal combustion engine heavy-duty truck applications and other hard to decarbonize mobile sources can also power zero-emission platforms, and it would be a huge miss to remove such fuels, especially if they provide carbon net negative results today. Renewable natural gas, for example, has delivered on average a carbon net negative performance in 2021 with a CI value of -33. Removing such fuels would essentially doom California to falling behind in the state's climate progress and almost certainly fail to meet the governor's climate goals. And fourth, and finally, the LCFS was founded on fuel neutrality, and it is that very fuel neutrality that creates a competitive and entrepreneurial program that is overachieving its projections. And I think that's something that CARB staff should be very proud of. This has been a rule that we worked with you on since its inception. And I am a little biased towards it. Sort of very proud of it. Working with Richard Corey and others on this, and so I think what's going to be really critical is we keep the integrity of the program, the spirit of the program, and don't break it. Don't break it if it's not broke, or don't fix it if it's not broken. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time for my ability to give you these comments.
Thank you.
Emily LeMay, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Thank you. Emily LeMay with the Northern California Power Agency. We represent 16 public power entities throughout Northern California. And I have just two quick clarifying questions on the third-party verification for electricity. The first is, when calculating the 6,000 credit exemption cap for expanding the third-party verification to EV charging, would base credits be included in that number? And then I'm just a little bit confused about the verification process for EV chargers and what you're imagining. It's sounding like maybe you're sending out for site visits to every EV charger. Is that what you're imagining, or is it kind of an open question exactly what is involved in the verification of these EV chargers? I just want to make sure we're providing helpful feedback.
So first part, base credits aren't included. Second part, it's an open question, and sending one to every resident isn't going to work. But if there are facilities, we have to look at what is required to achieve a level of certainty equal to all the other fuel types. So it's something we'd like to receive more comments on. Thank you.
John Sens, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question. John, we can't hear you if you're saying anything.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yep, can hear you.
All right, sorry, another two unmute buttons. So John Sens, Chevron REG. I had a question on the Deem complete date slide and the protocol there. I was wondering if anybody suggested aligning the tier 1 with the tier 2 dates instead of moving tier 2 forward. In my mind, moving it forward actually disincentivizes tier 2 pathways and sends a negative market signal. And I think there could be an even simpler way to go, which would be just going to the initial submission date. Then you don't have to figure out anything in terms of when things get credited. So curious to hear feedback on that.
Thanks. So I think that in the December workshop, we proposed removing the Deem complete date altogether. And then based on feedback, we moved toward this proposal. So I think this is the one that we wanted to speak about today, but welcome your feedback through comments. Thank you.
Angela Richards, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Hey, Stephen, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Yeah, my colleague Angela Richards is the one that registered for the webinar. So this is actually Jake Winters. I'm the head of impact here at Monarch Tractor. We do fully electric, smart, compact tractors here in the state of California, designed and built. I appreciate the team's time this morning putting on the session. This is really valuable information, and the opportunity to comment is greatly appreciated by us at Monarch Tractor. I had a quick comment in support of utilizing the onboard vehicle telematics for reporting, specifically in the off-road space that we're in. As the Lcfs program starts to really make its way into the commercial off-road sectors like agriculture and forestry, things of that nature, utilizing the onboard telematics for requirements up to achieve the reporting requirements is probably the lowest barrier for folks to participate in the program, and is going to see an increase in that historically pretty hard to reach sector. The work in these off-road sectors is usually performed using fleets of vehicles that are operating under the same ownership or operating umbrella. And with that, just historically, there's already been an established kind of fleet management reporting process in place in these places to basically track and maintain these diverse fleets of vehicles. And so the new electric vehicle and other zero emission vehicle offerings include connectivity and automated reporting on things like operating time and charging, energy used during the operation, where it's being used, et cetera, which could easily be used, leveraged to generate program credits. And it starts to open up some potentially interesting data analytics as well if you combine that vehicle telematics data and the operational data with the geospatial information that's coming back from these fleets. There's some operators, especially in the agricultural sector, that have operations that are distributed across the state of California and equipment that moves between these operations. And so you could actually utilize the data and analyze it to understand where the energy is actually being discharged or deployed, which could include filters like for low income or disadvantaged communities, for example. We also have seen from our agricultural operators that they are identifying challenges potentially getting fleet scale power run to remote areas to charge large fleets of vehicles, and are showing interest in megawatt scale off-grid deployments that include a large set of PV panels and charging stations in addition to the vehicles not connected to the grid. And so utilizing the connectivity that's already included on the vehicles as a means for them to participate in the Lcfs program with a zero CI fuel without having to duplicate any sort of connectivity hardware or incur additional costs to meet the program reporting requirements is going to further accelerate their ability to generate credits and participate. Thank you again for your time, and sorry for the technical difficulties earlier.
Yes, hi, I can take that question. This is Jacob. Yeah, we encourage novel zero emission technology, and we welcome your feedback on how to best capture the deployment of these types of vehicles. So we're looking forward to your feedback. Thank you.
David Rothbar, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Good morning. This is David Rothbard. I represent the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works. And also, since my fellow council members are not available, making comments on their behalf as well. I'll have written comments coming. Just wanted to kind of highlight the unique nature of wastewater treatment plants and the overall perspective here. And just, I think we've said this, but I want to repeat it, as far as to achieve the SB 1383 goals of reducing methane emissions from landfills, that food waste needs to go somewhere. for a number of reasons I'm not going to get into now, it can't go to compost facilities. It really needs to be digested, and we have the capacity to do so. As a result, we're going to generate more digester gas, which is a non-fossil fuel. It's renewable. It's something that's going to be here forever. And the problem we're having is finding a home for it, because when we talk to CARB staff in the scoping plan here and other venues, we're essentially being told put it in the pipeline, and it's really not feasible for most people because pipeline may not be near your facility. And also there's a lot of requirements that are triggered by Cal OSHA if you do that. And it's so draconian that a number of our members have just walked away from that pathway. So we really do need to, educate CARB staff as far as what is available in that respect for pipeline injection. But moreover, when we start talking about hydrogen, as you did in your presentation, it's something that is very difficult for us as well. That natural gas is a certain type of composition. Gas generated from a wastewater treatment plant is a completely different composition, and it's really unproven technology to convert that directly into hydrogen. If you want to do it indirectly, it's very inefficient. If we want to be, carbon neutral or carbon negative, we have a fuel today that works, and it really should be utilized in the transportation sector. So we really do need to work with you and, find a home for this gas. And if you could engage with us and give us some feedback as to how we can proceed with this gas, we'd really appreciate it. And I didn't see anything in your presentation. I'm sorry for being late to the meeting here, but if you could address our concerns as far as what are we supposed to do with this gas and how does the low carbon fuel standard mesh with this essential public service, I'd really appreciate it right now. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. So yeah, we did not get into that topic today, but would welcome your comments. Thank you.
Marcelo Moria, your microphone has been activated. Please feel free to ask another question.
Hi everyone, here is Arthur speaking from Raizen, a major global ethanol producer company from sugarcane crop. First of all, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to share with CARB staff a such important program worldwide, our thoughts on improvement that could be pursued for better calculating carbon intensity of renewable energy products entering California market. Well, my point here today is around the importance of low carbon biofuels through Lcfs program for reaching its short-term decarbonization targets. So for us, it's very clear that ethanol carbon intensity is very penalized for conservative emissions factor, such as considering backhaul penalties from shipping and electricity credits that considers the average carbon intensity of the national grid and not the marginal, which was considered before, and it sounds to be more accurate. So in this sense, and considering that we as biofuel producers are able to show carbon a science-based, a more accurate emissions factors, my question is whether CARB staff is looking for discussion at this point and review the emissions factor for better calculating the biofuel CI for the program. Thank you so much.
Hey, Marcelo, this is Anil. One of the intent of coming out with this workshop is essentially to solicit feedback from stakeholders such as yourself. So when we discuss the emission factor updates, we basically wanted to solicit feedback. So, send us your comments. If you wanted to have separate discussions with us, feel free. Again, this has to be peer-reviewed literature or government agencies, and it has to be robust, and we can always consider that part of the update. I'll just leave it at that for now. Thanks, Marcelo.
And our last raised hand is Scott Hedrick again. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. So just a comment. So I wasn't going to say anything, and I appreciate a second bite at the apple but we've had 4 or 5 people drop off due to Wi-Fi and some other things. I myself have a 4-legged colleague trying to jump on my laptop, so I get that. I just wanted to point out the staff, right? ECCC, Environment Climate Change Canada, has put on a number of workshops using the WebEx program around their clean fuel standard. And they have turned on and allow for the chat feature to be present. And I think it's been a useful tool for staff on their end to see what follow-up questions folks might have on a verbal question. In addition, it might cut down on some of the need for some folks to feel like they've got to do a long preamble of what excellent organization they work for and the goals and the missions of that organization. So I would strongly suggest if you could think about that for the future. Again, it's a feature that the Canadian government has used successfully. So I don't think it's either a technology issue or one of a tracking issue, but it would certainly streamline some of this process. And I think it would allow for folks to make some additional comments as the webinar goes forward. So if you guys could look at that, that'd be wonderful.
Thanks for the feedback. I think there might be one more, Stephen.
Correct. The last one is Steve Compton. Steve, your microphone has been activated. Please unmute yourself and feel free.
Hey, grand finale. Steve Compton with Savannah Bioenergy. We're a renewable natural gas developer. We have a project with one of the lowest CIs in the program right now, selling electricity from the RNG we generate. I have two questions. One, this is asked a number of times to Cheryl, and I know it's hard to come up with a definitive date, but in terms of the formal implementation of the revised LCFS, is it likely that could be in the very beginning of 2024 or more likely to happen at some point during the year? That's one question. And then the second question is staff planning, or could we have a bit of a schedule for how carbon intensities from the current program would be grandfathered into the new program? Thanks.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I mean, as we've talked about, we have our schedule laid out, and we're going to be moving forward as quickly as we can. And the earliest possible date for implementation would be in 2024. So I don't want to give any false information, but that's we know we need to update the program. We're going to update the program. It takes a year to update it once we start a formal process, and so our timeline is at the earliest an implementation date of 2024. So that's as specific as I am able to provide at this point. And then CIs being grandfathered in, I don't know if Anil, you can help with that.
Hi, this is Anil. At this point, we've made the updates in the past. One of the biggest consequential one was when some of the land use change factors were updated to reflect lower carbon intensities for corn. I can't really call this out now, but we've had a system in place, and we'll definitely put this out as part of the stakeholder, the public process, so we can sort of wrap this up. This is just a first introduction into the concept of potentially considering any updates to emission factors. But it's too early for us to exactly assess what the impacts of those would be to potentially considering grandfathering in or giving a period of time to transition over to those new carbon intensities.
Graham, you have another question? Please feel free to ask.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Cheryl, just wanted to provide a quick response and thank you for the efforts to keep this on a 2024 timeframe. I was afraid we were slipping off of that. We understand the regulatory process that CARB has to go through in these kinds of situations. So everything, and certainly we'll be working as a coalition to do everything we can to support the process and support you in that goal of a effective date beginning of 2024. So thank you for that.
All right. Any other questions out there, Stephen?
No more are showing up.
Okay, all right. Well, that was great timing. We're at 11:53 and really appreciate everyone's feedback today and look forward to additional comments in the written form that can be found on this webpage. We are accepting feedback through 5 p.m. on the date listed here, and so please provide by that date, and we will be taking those in and considering them. As I talked about before, we're still going through the through the public comments from the previous workshop, and are continuing to evaluate what potential changes staff might consider for the rulemaking. So looking forward to hearing more from you, and we anticipate more workshops to come over the next several months. So with that, I will conclude the workshop and thank everyone for their participation again.